Rain streaked across the fuselage of the Douglas C-47 Skytrain, turning the sky into a slate-gray canvas. The engines hummed with a dull vibration, propellers slicing through the damp air. Private First Class Thomas Brennan of the 58th Parachute Infantry Regiment gripped his M1 Garand, its cold metal unfamiliar against his shaking hands. He was wedged between two men he barely knew, packs weighing nearly 40 kilos, parachutes strapped tight against their shoulders, the tin of Hershey bars in his breast pocket untouched. The English Channel stretched below them, endless and unforgiving, waves dark and restless, as if warning them of what awaited. Brennan's thoughts darted to the rumors of flak fire over Normandy, the whispered stories of units scattered miles from their intended drop zones. He had trained for this moment for months, yet nothing could prepare him for the certainty of fear that pressed against his chest. His knuckles whitened around the rifle, and he closed his eyes briefly, imagining the green fields of France below, and wondering how many of them would make it back across the Channel alive. All around him, men murmured prayers, told stories, or tried to calm themselves with jokes that fell flat in the tense air. The C-47 shuddered as it banked, the rain pelting metal walls with relentless rhythm. Brennan imagined the German defenses waiting below, machine gun nests hidden in hedgerows, artillery batteries trained on every likely landing strip. He could feel the weight of history pressing down, the weight of thousands of lives resting on a few minutes of descent from the sky. The paratroopers' faces were pale, eyes flicking between the darkening clouds and the rows of soldiers lined up along the aircraft floor. Each man carried the same mixture of hope and dread, adrenaline sharpening every thought, every heartbeat echoing in the fuselage. Some clutched photographs of loved ones, some whispered last goodbyes. Brennan's mind focused on nothing but the simple certainties he had learned to trust, the jump, the landing, and the mission beyond. The navigator called out over the intercom, voices barely audible over the engine roar. Normandy was approaching. The C-47 dipped slightly, the rain smearing across the canopy. The soldiers adjusted their straps, checked their gear, and listened to the words that would soon signal the moment of descent. Brennan's stomach twisted, the nerves screaming louder than the engines themselves. Around him, men inhaled deeply, a shared breath of fear and resolve. Moments stretched, heavy and suffocating, until the jump doors opened with a metallic clang and the wind tore into the fuselage. He could feel the rush of air, the chaotic roar of the Channel below, the spray of rain mixing with the metallic tang of fear. The world seemed to slow, every detail etched into his mind. The shapes of men jumping before him, the jagged coastline in the distance, the tiny dots of Allied gliders moving toward the drop zones. As he stepped toward the edge, he felt the surge of inevitability. There was no turning back. His body tensed, muscles coiled, as the first leap carried him into history. The sky, once an impersonal slate above, now became a theater of survival. He twisted slightly, controlling the descent of his T-5 parachute, eyes scanning for hazards, hedgerows, and the positions of German troops below. Each second in freefall felt eternal, each breath a battle against panic, until the canopy snapped open and he was suspended, swaying above the fields of France. Time slowed further as the landing zone drew near. Brennan could see the scattered silhouettes of British troops, their uniforms dark against the muddied fields. Smoke rose in distant plumes, evidence of bombardment and resistance. He realized with sudden clarity that nothing in training had prepared them for the chaos of reality. The coordination, the uncertainty, the human element of fear and courage, it was all magnified, concentrated into these minutes before landing. And then the earth approached, and with a final brace, Brennan's boots struck the French soil,
The rain and wind tore at him, but he was alive. He looked around at the men who had jumped beside him, scattered but determined, some already moving toward objectives, others struggling to find cover. The weight of the moment pressed again, but now it was tempered with action. Every heartbeat, every step carried the echo of purpose. The jump was over, but the battle had only begun.
The sky over Normandy was still gray and heavy, rain streaking the air as the scattered silhouettes of paratroopers drifted toward the earth. Private Brennan tightened his grip on the straps of his T-5 parachute, eyes scanning the patchwork of fields below. Smoke curled from bombed villages, black against the wet green of hedgerows, a stark contrast to the orderly maps they had studied in England. The landscape that had seemed so precise in briefing rooms was now chaos incarnate. British troops moved methodically across the ground, their presence both reassuring and surreal. Brennan's mind raced. They had trained to land on empty fields, to find objectives with minimal contact, but now the reality was starkly different. Soldiers scattered across miles, gunfire echoing from hidden German positions, the terrain itself a trap of ditches, hedges, and flooded streams. Coordination was nearly impossible. Every man became his own unit, every decision a matter of life or death. As he descended, Brennan noticed the first signs of organized resistance: machine gun nests perched in thick hedgerows, flashes of artillery fire in the distance. Gliders touched down precariously, some tearing into the mud, others sliding to a halt like wounded birds. He adjusted his canopy to avoid landing in a shell crater and prayed silently for luck. Behind him, men shouted, their voices swallowed by the wind and rain, each calling for comrades who were nowhere to be seen. The proximity to British forces brought a fleeting sense of relief. Brennan recognized the dark green of the British uniforms, the glint of helmets, the disciplined movement that contrasted sharply with the frenzied American drop. Yet even among allies, confusion reigned. Radios crackled with broken messages, orders misheard or delayed, and the once clear chain of command blurred under the weight of incoming fire. Brennan realized quickly that survival depended on observation, improvisation, and the ability to make split-second decisions. The Channel's roar mingled with the distant explosions of naval bombardments, the smoke and fire painting the battlefield in shades of gray and orange. Brennan's thoughts wandered briefly to the reports of heavy German presence inland, divisions trained specifically to repel airborne assaults. Every field seemed a potential trap, every grove a possible ambush. Men landed in marshes, tangled in barbed wire, were dragged by mud that swallowed boots whole. The simple act of reaching cover became a trial by fire. He landed near a small copse, boots sinking into mud, rain soaking through his uniform. Around him men rallied, checking weapons, dragging comrades out of craters, signaling for movement. Brennan spotted a small group of British soldiers taking position along a ridge. Their calm, trained efficiency was a lifeline in the midst of chaos. He ran toward them, eyes scanning constantly, senses sharp. Each step was calculated, each breath measured against the background of gunfire and distant explosions. As they linked up, Brennan felt the magnitude of the operation hit him fully. Thousands of soldiers dropped behind enemy lines, dispersed across miles of contested territory, yet every man played a part in the larger strategy of the invasion. He listened as the British sergeant issued concise orders, movement plans that had to be adapted on the fly. Their coordination, even imperfect, offered a glimpse of hope that the chaos could be molded into progress. Yet the land itself was a formidable enemy. Streams overflowed from constant rain, hedgerows turned into labyrinths of mud and steel, and every rise in terrain seemed to conceal hidden threats. Brennan's mind raced with calculations, distance to objective,
estimated German positions, how to navigate without drawing fire. He had been trained for combat, but this was more than training. This was a test of instinct, nerve, and courage. Hours passed, each marked by bursts of gunfire, shouted commands, and the relentless pounding of rain. Brennan moved with the British soldiers, observing, learning, adapting. He realized the true nature of airborne warfare: disorientation, unpredictability, and the constant necessity to act decisively. Every landing point told a different story. Some men had been cut down immediately, others were lost in woods or fields, yet every survivor carried the same mission forward. By the time he reached a small ridge overlooking a bombed village, he could see the larger picture. The invasion was unfolding, not in neat formations, but in a chaotic tapestry of bravery, improvisation, and sheer determination. The presence of British forces provided guidance, but the Americans' initiative and resilience were equally crucial. Brennan's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the realization that he was part of a pivotal moment in history. Each decision he made in the next minutes could save lives or cost them. As rain continued to lash the fields, Brennan paused briefly, surveying the smoke, mud, and scattered soldiers. The first sight of the landing zone, so long imagined in briefings, was now a living, breathing, dangerous reality. Allies and enemies intertwined in a complex, deadly dance. The lessons of training collided with the unpredictability of war, and Brennan understood, in a way no map could convey, that D-Day would be remembered not for perfection, but for the courage, improvisation, and humanity displayed amid chaos.
The ground hit with a jolt that sent Brennan stumbling, mud sucking at his boots as he struggled to regain balance. Around him, men who had jumped alongside him were scattered like leaves in a storm, some already firing, some dazed, others calling out for lost comrades. The reality of landing behind enemy lines hit with relentless force. Every hedge, every rise, every shadow could hide a German soldier with a machine gun ready to fire without warning. Training had prepared them for strategy, but not for the raw, chaotic violence of actual combat. Brennan's rifle was steady in his hands, though his breath came in sharp, short bursts. The fields around him were pocked with bomb craters, twisted fragments of destroyed gliders, and debris from anti-aircraft fire. The distant rumble of naval bombardment mingled with the staccato of small arms fire, creating a symphony of destruction. He spotted a corporal from his regiment crouched behind a shattered wall, signaling him forward. Without hesitation, Brennan sprinted, weaving between craters, the rain slicking the ground beneath his boots. A burst of gunfire tore through the air, clipping the top of a hedge nearby. Brennan dived for cover, his heart hammering. Each moment was measured in instinct: react, move, fire, survive. Men around him shouted, sometimes in fear, sometimes in coordination, a mix of order and chaos that defined the drop zone. He saw a fellow paratrooper stumble, hit by shrapnel, and another dive into a shell hole, shaking with adrenaline. Survival depended on speed, awareness, and the ability to act decisively without hesitation. As he moved forward, Brennan noticed the signs of German resistance. Trenches and foxholes dotted the landscape, carefully camouflaged among the hedgerows. He could hear the German soldiers shouting commands, their voices carrying through the rain-soaked air, precise and terrifying in contrast to the scattered Americans. He realized the drop had placed them exactly where the enemy expected, and that improvisation would be their only chance. The field was no longer just terrain, it was a battlefield, a living entity that demanded respect and attention. Brennan's unit began to regroup in small clusters, men finding one another amid the chaos. A lieutenant barked orders, pointing to objectives that were partially visible through smoke and rain. They needed to secure crossroads, disable communication lines, and prepare to move inland, but each step was fraught with danger. Mines hidden in mud, barbed wire, and sudden ambushes turned every decision into a gamble.
Brennan's eyes darted constantly, calculating trajectories, estimating distances, identifying threats. Every sense was heightened, every instinct was survival. The noise was deafening, artillery exploding, bullets whizzing past, men shouting, gliders crashing. Brennan fired his M1 Garand in short, controlled bursts, each shot a test of composure. He ducked behind a shattered hedgerow, observing a group of German soldiers moving to reinforce their position. Adrenaline surged as he and two others exchanged fire, the bursts sharp and immediate. They pressed forward only when the Germans were temporarily suppressed, every movement calculated, every action deliberate. Despite the terror, moments of clarity emerged. Brennan saw the bravery of his comrades, men risking everything to pull others from harm's way. He saw an American sergeant drag a wounded soldier to cover, exposing himself to machine gun fire without hesitation. It was in these moments, the split-second decisions, the courage under fire, that the truth of D-Day revealed itself. Ordinary men performing extraordinary acts under unimaginable pressure. As the hours dragged on, Brennan and the men of his regiment began to establish small positions, securing key hedgerows and paths to prevent German counterattacks. Each action required improvisation. Maps were of little use when the terrain had been altered by bombing and shell fire, when roads were impassable and fields flooded. They adapted, using whatever cover they could find, signaling through hand gestures and shouts, coordinating as best they could with scattered units. The battlefield had become a living puzzle, each piece unpredictable and dangerous. By late afternoon, Brennan looked back across the fields he had traversed. The drop zone was a chaotic tapestry of survival and loss. Bodies lay where they had fallen, smoke and fire marking points of conflict. And yet, through the chaos, small pockets of order had emerged. Men had regrouped, positions had been taken, and despite staggering losses, the mission moved forward. Brennan felt exhaustion press against him, wet and heavy, but also a sense of grim determination. They had landed in hell, but they were alive, and they were fighting. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, casting long shadows across the shattered fields. Brennan's gaze swept over the landscape, taking in the destruction, the courage, and the sheer scale of what they had endured. He knew that the battle had only just begun, but the drop had already changed everything. The chaos of airborne warfare, the unpredictability of the terrain, and the resilience of men in the face of danger would define the next critical hours of D-Day. Every heartbeat, every decision, every act of courage would shape history in ways that no map, no plan, no briefing could ever fully prepare them for.
The rain had eased slightly, but the mud and chaos remained. Brennan moved cautiously along a narrow path, the distant gunfire a constant reminder that they were still deep behind enemy lines. Ahead, he spotted a small group of British soldiers taking position along a ridge. Their movements were deliberate, disciplined, a stark contrast to the scattered American paratroopers around him. Relief washed over him, tempered immediately by the knowledge that coordination under fire would be no simple task. He approached cautiously, hands raised slightly to signal. The British sergeant acknowledged him with a brief nod, then motioned for him to join their line. Brennan's eyes took in their formation, their careful spacing, the way each man covered his sector with practiced precision. It was a scene that suggested calm amid the storm, but Brennan knew better. The calm was fragile, maintained only by discipline and courage. As they moved together through the hedgerows, the Americans and British began to share information. Brennan described enemy positions, machine gun nests, and areas where men had landed scattered and alone. The British relayed plans for securing roads and crossroads, for linking up with other units advancing from the beaches. It was a delicate dance of improvisation, each side relying on the other's strengths while adapting to the terrain and the unpredictability of combat. The first joint firefight occurred within minutes.
German soldiers had regrouped in a small orchard, hidden by fog and the remains of bombed trees. Brennan and 2 British riflemen exchanged fire with the enemy, bullets kicking up mud around them. The coordination between the forces was imperfect but effective. One man suppressed, the others moved forward, covering each other as they pressed through the orchard. The adrenaline burned hot, but so did the sense of accomplishment. Together, they could accomplish more than any scattered individual. Brennan noticed the contrasts between the troops. The Americans were raw, often improvising, their courage driven by instinct and adrenaline. The British moved with measured steps, trained reactions honed by months of experience in Europe. Together, the differences complemented each other, blending into a single force capable of adapting quickly to unexpected developments. He realized that in the chaos of war, alliances were not just political, they were tactical, essential for survival. They pushed toward a crossroads that had been partially destroyed by bombardment. A German patrol had been reported in the area, and Brennan's group moved with caution. The paratroopers provided rapid, aggressive firepower, while the British secured flanks and coordinated movements. Every step was calculated, yet fraught with danger. A misstep could draw fire, yet hesitation could cost lives. The fog, the mud, and the remnants of destroyed hedgerows made visibility poor, and every shadow seemed like an enemy ready to strike. Hours passed in a blur of movement, fire, and shouted commands. Brennan noticed how quickly trust had to be established, how reliance on comrades, both American and British, could mean the difference between life and death. Men carried wounded soldiers across open fields, bullets skipping dangerously close, while others set up temporary positions to provide covering fire. Coordination was imperfect, but evolving with each encounter, each shared decision, each successful maneuver against the enemy. As they advanced, Brennan observed the larger picture. The British were moving toward key objectives inland, while American paratroopers secured secondary targets, often encountering resistance in unexpected pockets. Yet through the chaos, a sense of unity emerged. Communication, improvisation, and mutual reliance formed the backbone of their combined efforts. Each man, each small group, contributed to the larger strategy in ways that could not be rehearsed or planned fully. By late afternoon, Brennan's group had reached a small ridge overlooking a partially destroyed village. From this vantage point, they could see German positions, advancing units, and the scattered movements of both American and British soldiers below. Brennan felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The coordination with the British forces had not only improved their tactical position, but it also revealed the scale of the invasion in a way he had not anticipated. D-Day was not a series of isolated actions, it was a living, breathing operation, chaotic, yet astonishingly cohesive in its unfolding. The sun broke through the clouds briefly, glinting off wet helmets and muddy rifles. Brennan glanced at the British sergeant beside him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were allies, yes, but more importantly, they were collaborators in survival, participants in a historic operation whose outcome rested on trust, courage, and adaptability. Each small victory, each secure position, each successful exchange of intelligence brought them closer to the mission's objectives. The battle was far from over, but in these moments of shared purpose, the soldiers understood the extraordinary power of cooperation amid chaos.
The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving the fields of Normandy a quagmire of mud and debris. Brennan stood atop a small ridge, surveying the land they had fought to secure. Smoke still curled from bombed villages, and the distant echoes of gunfire reminded him that the battle was far from over. Yet there was a strange clarity in the aftermath, a chance to reflect on the chaos, courage, and humanity that had defined the day.
Bodies lay where they had fallen, reminders of the cost of victory. But around them, survivors moved with grim determination. Men tended to the wounded, pulled comrades from craters, and checked their weapons, preparing for the next engagement. Brennan's hands were raw and cold, his uniform soaked through, yet his mind was sharp. Each action of the day had taught him lessons no training could convey. Improvisation was essential. Courage was measured not in absence of fear, but in action despite it, and every decision could ripple across the battlefield. He thought back to the first jump, the endless rain, the roar of the C-47 engines, and the adrenaline-fueled leap into uncertainty. The land below had seemed both alien and terrifying, yet it had forced each soldier to confront the immediacy of life and death. The scattered paratroopers, the improvisation under fire, the small victories against German resistance, it all painted a picture of D-Day that no map, briefing, or plan could fully capture. Linking up with the British forces had been a turning point. Coordination under fire revealed the extraordinary resilience of ordinary men. Brennan remembered the sergeant's concise orders, the careful covering fire, and the trust that had to be earned in the heat of battle. Allies were no longer just distant comrades, they became essential collaborators, each action intertwined with the next, each decision impacting countless others across the field. The sight of American and British soldiers moving together, adapting and surviving amidst chaos, offered a glimpse into the broader purpose of the invasion. Every hedge, crater, and bombed-out structure told a story. Brennan noted the ingenuity of men who had repurposed debris for cover, who had improvised signals when radios failed, and who had carried wounded comrades across open ground despite heavy fire. It was a testament to human endurance and the capacity to act decisively under extreme pressure. D-Day was not just a battle of weapons, it was a battle of mind, body, and spirit. As the sun began to break through the clouds, illuminating the devastated landscape, Brennan considered the scale of what had been achieved. Thousands of paratroopers, scattered and often isolated, had secured critical positions, disrupted German defenses, and laid the groundwork for the larger invasion. Every man who survived had become part of a narrative far greater than himself, a story of courage, sacrifice, and relentless perseverance. He remembered the faces of his comrades, the moments of terror, the brief instances of triumph, and the quiet acts of heroism that went unnoticed. A medic pulling a soldier from a shell hole, a private providing covering fire for a comrade, a sergeant guiding a small group through treacherous terrain. These moments, small in isolation, formed the fabric of D-Day's success. Brennan understood that the true measure of the invasion was not in maps or objectives alone, but in these human acts that defied fear and chaos. By evening, a battlefield began to take shape under the soldiers' efforts. Positions had been secured, roads partially cleared, and scattered units gradually linked together. Brennan felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down, yet also a sense of profound accomplishment. They had landed in a storm, faced overwhelming danger, and emerged, scarred but alive, with a clearer understanding of the power of coordination, courage, and resilience. As he looked out over the fields, Brennan realized that D-Day had changed everything, not just in the strategic sense, but in the way men understood their own capacity for courage. The lessons of the day would linger long after the mud dried, long after the gunfire ceased. The importance of adaptability, the necessity of trust among allies, and the human capacity to endure and act decisively amidst chaos. Each heartbeat, each step, each choice had contributed to the unfolding of history, and Brennan understood with quiet awe that he had witnessed something extraordinary. The first stars began to appear above the Normandy sky, faint glimmers over a battered but resilient land. Brennan's mind, though weary, was filled with reflection on the fallen,
on the living, on the unexpected lessons of bravery and humanity in the midst of horror. D-Day was more than a military operation. It was a crucible of courage, an enduring testament to what men could endure, achieve, and inspire when confronted with the extraordinary. And as he moved to regroup with his unit, Brennan carried with him the knowledge that every step taken, every action executed, and every life spared that day had helped shape the course of history forever.